Hello, I'm Enzo, and today I'll be playing more Gregtech. As usual, there's gonna be like a trillion things to do, so let's get right into everything. Starting out from last episode, I'm working on making a couple of little setups. I'm hoping to produce 3 very important resources and have them automated for a while. Sodium persulfate is what I'll be using to etch all of my boards in the future, and I'm going to need insane amounts of that. So naturally I decided to automate it. This system requires sulfur and salt, which are quite easy, and produces hydrogen as a byproduct, which will actually be quite helpful. The chemical reactor next to that is producing sodium hydroxide, which is used for all sorts of recipes actually, and also creates hydrogen as a byproduct, so I throw both of those into a tank that gets imported to the ME system. Besides that, I made a tiny little electrolyzer setup with some extra automation, and essentially it takes sugarcane from my network, pulverizes it into sugar, and then that gets electrolyzed to create carbon, which I don't really care about. Most important of all, it gives me a ton of oxygen. This is pretty much going to be my oxygen source for quite a while, to say the least. After that, I got into way more magic. If you see my previous episodes, you should know this is all cheated in, by the way. I really freaking hate magic, and Thaumcraft is starting to grow on me a little bit, but I still hate most of their systems, especially this part. You see, I have to set up something called infusion, and for that you need like every single type of aspect, and there's not many ways to automate that very well until I get the applied energistics parts for it. But to get the applied energistics parts, you have to do infusion. So it's just a giant mess. I really hate this whole system. But whatever, I got it set up and it works. This machine next to me is like a better crucible. It doesn't require water, which I didn't realize until later, and it can do recipes automatically and for cheap. There's no like waste byproduct, which is very nice. Infusion is required to craft all sorts of extremely late stuff in Thaumcraft. Actually, it's required to make most things now that I think about it. As a matter of fact, I'm trying to craft stuff like the nano goggles of revealing, whatever. So I require like a trillion different random items, and I'll have to go get those, which requires me to go on a massive shopping spree around my base to get things. But it's definitely going to be worth it in the end, because the stuff I'm also making gives me a higher fizz discount, which is very nice for crafting other Thaumcraft stuff. And yeah, it's a very neat system, I have to admit. I just hate all of the infrastructure and other work you need to build to do this. I'll admit, this is not necessary, like this level of automation here, but otherwise I'd have to have like a billion little jars of resources. It would just be a giant mess. I can't wait until I can turn this all into applied energistics and get that working instead. I will also admit there are a couple of items in Thaumcraft that are actually useful, like the Thaumic Restorer. This allows you to use the whatever that essentially is called, the blue tool stuff. It's extremely cheap and you can get it from tons of Gregtech stuff. You essentially use it to repair pretty much any item for very cheap. And when I mean pretty much any item, let's just say things can get interesting. It doesn't seem to work on a lot of modded items, like I don't know if it works with Tinker's Construct, but if you guys remember those enchanted books that I was making in the other episode, I can actually repair the plates that make those, and yeah, infinite enchanted books without spending tons of experience. It's pretty stupid I will admit. Alright, I will do a tiny bit of magic later on, but back to normal things that I actually enjoy doing, and legitimately at that. This entire setup is a bit of a mess. It requires some stuff from oil processing, but this is to make acetic acid into acetone and some other chemicals combined to make epoxoid. Epoxoid is one of the higher tier resources that I need. It's used to make all sorts of new circuit boards, a couple of tiers at least. And the first one I'll be making is, well, the next tier of circuit board. I think it's literally like epoxy, and that'll be used to make circuits, both better circuits and cheaper, which is very nice. It's a relatively easy setup. The only difficulty with this is that it requires some stuff from oil processing, and I actually shut the entire oil processing area down near the end of the episode, so sustaining this might be a bit of a problem, but thankfully I don't need too much epoxy. While I'm working on all sorts of tech, I had an insane idea. Okay, it looks stupid, and it is, trust me, but it works. And you know the rule. If it's stupid and it works, it's not stupid. So, this setup is a steam multi-block blender. Yes, I know I'm using steam, but I don't have access to the actual multi-block mixer for quite a while, and I had a crazy idea I had to try. This thing is using an infinite water hatch. It's just like, it gets more ridiculous the longer you look at it. It requires lubricant and stone dust from my network to create something called drilling fluid. I saw this for a long time, and I had no clue what it was used for. However, I require just ungodly amounts of this stuff for later on, because, well, you'll see. In the background, I've also been working on some new, well, I say new, but it's just Ender.io stuff. I need to make all sorts of things for one of my plans, and long story short, I have to wait like over an hour or something for my thing I'm working on to charge. I could easily make a better capacitor bank, but that's way too much effort. While that was running, I decided to go back to Magic for a bit, and because I didn't research like one specific thing I needed, I couldn't get the other research I wanted, so I just straight up cheated in some of the drives I needed. I already made the actual storage parts, which were really cheap actually, but I couldn't make the housing for some reason. Well, I didn't have the warding research I needed, and guess what? The one item I want for all of this is warded glass. Warded glass is actually pretty cheap, I have to say. You require some thorium ingots, some great wood, and glass, which are all super easy, especially thorium with my new setup. But to make the actual wand focus, you need Botania, like certain mana quartz or whatever. And I will do some magic, I promise, but I'm not doing Botania. I hate that mod even more than Thaumcraft and Witchery and Blood Magic. Like, I really don't want to do any of these mods. I hate all of them. But unfortunately, they have some useful things that I do want. So I am forced to actually get into some stuff. Especially in next episode, I think I'll start to get into Blood Magic, because there's some stuff I want from that for later machines. But whatever. I now have Essentia storage for my Applied Energistics network. On top of that, I had to do even more cheating. I gave myself a special kit of armor because I wanted to make this thing legitimately, I just didn't have the biz capacity. Now, this is where I got scammed either way, so I don't mind that I'm actually cheating, because apparently, and like I didn't read this anywhere, the staff I'm trying to make isn't the same as like a wand or scepter. The problem is, I was hoping to use the insane capacity of the staff, which is like 250, to actually craft better and better items. Unfortunately, the staff is absolute garbage, and all of that capacity is only for like casting spells, which is just dumb. So yeah, scepters, wands can only be used for crafting. They can't be used for focuses like warding that I made. It's ridiculous. It really is. So I'll get to why I went through all of this insane trouble a bit later on, but the staff has several uses. Besides having good capacity, unfortunately only good for making spells, I made two focuses that do specific things. The first one was warding. Well, I cheated that one in so I can make warded glass, which will be useful later on. The second one I made legitimately, believe it or not, and it's going to be insanely helpful. This focus is called maintenance. Yes, it performs maintenance on whatever machine you click it on for the cost of a tiny bit of Viz, which, considering I have Viz for free because of Primal Shooms, yeah, that's insane. I will admit, tech in a way is a bit cheaper, but I'd have to recharge that constantly and then soldering wire. So that is one of the few things I like about Magic, being able to pretty much for free repair all of my machines. On top of that, and I'm going to talk about a ton of stuff in 2.9, I guess that's one thing I forgot to mention. This video is probably going to go out like after 2.9 is released, but everything in here is before Gregtech 2.9, obviously. And one of the big things they're adding in 2.9, I believe, is a Viz maintenance hatch or something like that, where you can use magic to automatically repair things, which would be very cool to set up, actually. But I'm going to be getting to that in next episode instead. A bit earlier, I decided to make myself some diamond dollies, which are quite expensive because they require a nether star plate, but allow you to transport spawners. I decided to get the Enderman spawner from several episodes ago, and I'll probably use it later on, but I needed some Endermen to create Ender crystals for Ender IO, and those crystals are used to make one thing called the powered spawner. That's been my entire goal for Ender IO, by the way, and I have several cool ideas for what to do with it. I made this thing called an over-chanting table, and yeah, as you see, I ran out of a couple essences because I didn't check my storage beforehand. Whatever. I made it like 99% legitimately. Essentially, the over-chanting table allows you to enchant things like one level beyond what they have. Unfortunately, they patched one thing I was hoping to do a while ago, of course. But essentially, you could like place down a diamond spike and then pick it back up, and it kind of forgets that it's been over-chanted already, so you can't have like infinite looting, which is what I was hoping to do easily. A bit unfortunate, but looting 4 is still pretty good. Alright, here's what all of this work so far has been going towards. A massive chest of loot. And if you're wondering why, well, I made a powered spawner. These things take forever to make if you don't have like the good capacitors to keep powering the machines. It's just a whole nightmare in total. But I'm using this to automatically spawn wisps, which I did capture these things legitimately. I was looking all around the world for stuff earlier on. Long story I'll probably get to near the end of the episode or next episode. But these wisps, I think, always spawn infernal, which means they're going to be insanely difficult and have crazy modifiers, but drop an insane amount of good loot. The main thing I wanted from the wisps is actually their essence drops, which will probably come in handy next episode, because I didn't do too much magic for the rest of the episode, but the resources I'm gathering are for later on plans. So that essence will be useful, but on top of that, infernal enemies have a chance to drop all sorts of like really high-end enchanted gear and enchanted books. You know the best part? They drop an insane amount of chainmail. And if you guys didn't know, this makes for a super easy and cheap item farm. It's quite ridiculous. In this case, though, the chainmail can be macerated or pulverized, whatever you want to use, into steel dust. Yes, this is a free, well, besides the power, infinite steel farm. On top of gold, iron, diamond, wood, and string if you want that, but I can filter those out. Not to mention that infernals can drop crazy stuff like, well, you can probably see some examples here. Ender pearls, pistons, droppers, dispensers, golden apples, and even stuff like blocks of diamond and emerald later on. It's unbelievable. And this is all perfectly legitimate, or at least possible to do legitimately. You know what? Wait a minute, I did all of this legitimately. I made the powered spawner. Yeah, this is a legit setup. So it's pretty insane that it's just this powerful. Of course, some parts aren't easy to get until this stage in HV. I'm pretty sure you can probably do it in MV, but who knows? Alright, do you guys remember earlier when I was making that massive container full of drill fluid? The reason I was using a multi-block steam mixer is so that I could make tons of it super fast. The reason you need tons of it is for this building, the ore drilling plant. This is a direct upgrade to the HV miner, I believe, and it's actually a multi-block structure. You build it the exact same as like the fluid drilling rigs, and it might be one of my new favorite multi-blocks because of how powerful it is. Essentially, it drills down to the center of the world, just like all of the other solid or fluid miners. But what's so unique about it is that once it hits the center of the world, it starts branching out in a certain area around it. In this case, it's 48 blocks all around it, which is pretty insane, meaning it can also drill into other ore chunks, which is very nice. The only problem with this thing is that it consumes just oceans of drilling fluid. It's not very expensive to make, just, water, lubricant, and stone dust, but you need a lot of it. And that's why I had to make that entire setup. The ore drilling plant also produces several times more ore than mining it and processing it yourself. Even with normal levels of fortune and then the macerators and all of that, this is still way better. And of course, fully automatic. But besides the drilling fluid, I noticed that storing all of the items is a massive problem. There are just so many items you wouldn't believe it. It took up almost all of my compressed chests. Actually, several more, because I had to clear them out a bunch of times. But it's absolutely worth it because, especially later on, I'll bring this to not the moon, but other planets I go to, and I can get so many more resources for the same trip, which will be very nice. Sometimes it's almost surreal to watch back certain clips and realize this was my base however many hours ago. That's insane. Because by the end of the episode, this base is going to transform completely. It's going to be pretty insane. Anyways, I know it's very confusing looking from the back here, but this setup is going to be the start of some of the most important stuff, at least for now. You see, this horrible line of LCRs is what's called the baby Platline. Okay, I will admit I may have watched a bit of a tutorial for this, but the major difference between the tutorial and my build, well, okay, a couple of things. First of all, I'm not using applied energistics like I really should, especially later on once I realized how powerful it was. And second of all, I'm using tetrahedrite as a starter ingredient. Essentially, you can use tetrahedrite and some platinum metallic powder dust to get, it's like 2 kilograms more platinum whatever liquid that you get from it. Honestly, it's probably not worth it for how much the ore refining process slowed down the entire line, but I have so much of this stuff in reserve, I thought I might as well. Also, I have signs to label all of the different steps of this process, but honestly, I'm not going to tell you how it works. Why? I don't remember how 99% of this setup works anymore. It kind of just does, and it just keeps going in the background. So as long as nothing breaks, I don't worry about it because I feel like thinking about it will break it somehow. It just works. That's all I know and care about for now. It doesn't produce all of the platinum byproducts, which I'll upgrade this thing way later on once I have the resources to do the entire platinum line and get every single resource out of my platinum dust. But for now, I'm just doing a couple of basic steps to make the very basic and pure platinum dust that I want. Technically, this entire setup is not necessary. You can just throw the dirty platinum metallic powder into a blast furnace to get a tiny bit of platinum nuggets, but that is very inefficient because you lose all of the byproducts from that whole process. So that's why I decided to make this. I can get all the byproducts for now, and I'll deal with refining them later on. While that's running, I decided to set up a couple of other processes, including this one. I know it sounds a bit ridiculous, but I can't make the next tier or multi-block of compressor yet, and it's insanely expensive. Here's like a little cheat, not really cheating, but like life hack, game hack, if you will. I decided that using steam compressors, the high pressure ones, are just infinitely better than the multi-block compressors later on. They are infinitely cheaper to make, easier to power, as long as you have a steam setup, and just better in general, honestly, because the multi-block compressor requires an insane amount of stuff to make and EV voltage tier to get the same parallel as these. Of course, it also goes way faster per recipe, but for how easy these are to make, I'd say it's just more worth it. Of course, once you get the multi-block compressor, you'll be able to get the IV air intake hatch, so the whole air problem of compressing cans won't even matter, but you get the point. This little automated setup automatically produces nitrogen, which I desperately need in my network, and oxygen as a byproduct, which I don't really need anymore because, well, I've already automated oxygen. And I didn't show it here, but I made another little setup with an electrolyzer and some super tanks to automatically take stuff out of canisters. Over by my benzene setup, it's using like the dimethylbenzene that is practically useless for now, and it's electrolyzing it into a ton of hydrogen to also throw back into my network. This is extremely exciting. You guys see this stuff? TPV alloy. That is the entire reason I have been trying to get platinum for so long now. TPV will allow me to make the next tier of coils for my EBFs and get an insane amount of progression done. If you guys remember from last episode, one of the big things I wanted for a while now is EV energy hatches, so that I can upgrade some of my machines, especially the EBFs, even further. Unfortunately, those are gated behind tungsteel, which is gated behind TPV coils. So once I get 16 of these coils, I can upgrade my blast furnaces and process all sorts of new materials. One of the coolest parts of the Platline, especially for now, is that a lot of it can be like reused, and the best example being it is like the platinum salt you get out of one part of it. You throw that into a sifter, and from there you get, it's like reprecipitated platinum salt or something like that. That's one part of it or something. Anyways, you throw that into the electric blast furnace and you can get platinum metallic powder back out of it, so you can throw it like to restart the system essentially. It doesn't feed itself perfectly, obviously, but it gives you a tiny bit of it back and some chlorine back, which is very nice. Because part of this process requires ammonia chloride, which ammonia isn't bad because it's just nitrogen and hydrogen, but it also requires chlorine for that. There's like hydrochloric acid for one part. Yeah, it's just nice to get some of the products back. Next up, I made a really cool little multi-block setup here. It's a bunch of LCRs all together, you should have figured by now, and it's making a couple of fascinating products. One is classic PVC, or polyvinyl chloride. This stuff isn't too special. As a matter of fact, it makes up a lot of the plumbing in your house in real life, which is very cool, but I need it as, I don't really know the right term for it, like an additional product for one thing I want to make later on. An additive, I guess you could say. But the other thing is far more important. It's like polyvinyl sulfide or something like that. It requires some products very similar to PVC, but obviously sulfur instead. This new polyvinyl sulfide is necessary to actually make upcoming wires into cables. It kind of sucks that I had to make a whole new processing line just to make some fancy new cables, but it's going to be necessary for future tiers, including the upcoming IV tier that I'm just about to get into. This stuff is required to make like tungsten, I think platinum wires, which are going to be stupidly expensive, but of course this is Gregtech, I expect nothing less at this point. On top of that, I decided to use this as an opportunity to change one of my settings over to admin mode for the quest system. This is because there are just dozens of quests that I haven't completed because I haven't done like very specific early steps. A good example is like the oil quest line, because you need to hold specific oils and fractions in cells in your inventory. I'd rather not do that because it's a massive hassle to go back and get all that stuff. So instead, I set Better Quest to admin mode so that I can manually complete all of these quests and get the rewards that I should have had already for them. And it just cleans up a ton of my quest book, which is very nice. One of the main reasons I also set up that polyethyl vinyl, whatever, sulfide stuff, is so that I could make 8x platinum wires. Now, why are these so important? Well, I need them to make a brand new type of block. As you can see, all of the parts in my inventory, it's gonna get pretty insane pretty fast. These are nuclear reactors. Okay, these are like the casings of the reactor. I'm very close to making the actual blocks, but you need 3 of these casings to make a reactor. So in total, you need 9 casings, and each casing requires a ton of stuff, including dense titanium and lead. All right, so that's like 81 lead, or probably more than that. I think it's 81 titanium per reactor, which is mind-blowing, by the way. Yeah, these things are insanely expensive to make, but I assure you, nuclear reactors are absolutely worth it as they are one of the most powerful, well, power options I have available for a long time. But of course, they come with many more issues than standard power sources. Nuclear reactors are very dangerous to build and operate, naturally, on top of being just insanely expensive, almost painfully so. But of course, the power they produce, especially in Gregtech, absolutely worth the price. But it's going to take me a while to get everything set up. And that's what everything I've been working on this episode is slowly working towards. Getting good power so I can kind of make a real factory for once. A lot of the time I just had things going one by one, or I have like individual generators for machines, but the entire goal from now on is to centralize my power, well, production and sources, so that I can build like a proper factory, I guess. Even after countless hours of preparation and gathering supplies, on top of clearing out a massive hole in my base to build this stuff, I'm still nowhere near done, by the way. There are several more items that I actually need before I can build my reactors, and the most obvious of which is fuel. You know, the most important part. So, I don't have many options just yet, but I will be making thorium fuel rods, specifically quadruple ones, which take a specialized type of fuel cell, just like my liquid cells, but thankfully these require like iron ingots, so they're far cheaper, even though I have PTFE to make cheap cells now. Whatever. Then I gotta throw them in a canner with thorium. Unfortunately, we're not done yet, because to combine all of the cells to make quad cells, I have to combine them with large steel rods. It literally takes a single ingot of steel to make a quad cell. And I need, I think it's like 40 of these quad cells per reactor. I'm going to be setting up 6 reactors by the end of this episode, by the way. It's going to be a lot of steel. Not to mention every time I have to replace the cells in the reactors. On top of that pure insanity, I have to make another type of fluid canister, also called a cell. I know it's very confusing here, but these cells require the standard fluid cells and like dozens of stacks of tin plates. Yes, specifically tin. I have to combine these specific cells. Thankfully, it's only 6 kiloliters of liquid helium, but that means I need to make an insane amount of liquid helium too. Like I've said, this is a very extensive and expensive process, but absolutely worth it once it's done, which is still going to take a while. Oh, and with those steps, don't even think I am close to getting the nuclear reactor started yet, because I am not. I still have like a billion more steps. Alright, first of all, these extreme voltage battery chargers. These allow me to use batteries as a very simple power storage, especially considering I can't get the power storage I want just yet. That's going to be quite a bit later and insanely expensive. But these are basic battery buffers and can output multiple amps, which is very nice. As the batteries, I'll actually be using Laptronic crystals because they can hold 10 million energy units compared to like 6.4 of the lithium quad battery I can make. I don't have Cenarium yet, so I can't make the actual batteries at this tier, but whatever, you get the point. On top of all of that, I'm working on getting stuff in the background to actually automate the reactors, turning them on, turning them off, you know, for the battery buffers, and of course, fueling them, the most important part. Well, honestly, fuel is not the most important part. There's one more that I'll get to very soon. I would normally say that the setup is now complete, but I assure you it's still not done. It actually has some bugs in it, but there are several types of nuclear reactors that you can actually make. By default, I would have probably gone with the standard, like, passive reactor, where it automatically cools itself, but it produces, like, no power. It's just not worth it. This is what's known as a vacuum reactor. Essentially, you use a vacuum freezer and coolant cells, which you saw me making earlier, to actively cool the reactor. Unfortunately, this system is insanely dangerous to work with. There's only one mod called Steve's Factory Manager, which I've never worked with before, and this is the only way where you can actually get your reactor to swap coolant on the exact same tick. Every other method has some danger involved with it. The primary issue with this whole method is that I do not understand this mod at all. I'm watching a video tutorial and reading the actual documentation to try and get it to work. Let's just say it's not perfect yet. You probably saw the warning signs in there. The automation doesn't work quite yet. You'll see that soon enough. All I care about is that the reactors are actually creating power. It's beautiful. So as you can see, I've used this new source of power to, well, power an electric blast furnace with EV power hatches. This is all insanely exciting. And while that's working on creating some other TPV and resources, I'm gonna do something that is 900% cheating, but I assure you it's gonna be worth it because it'll be awesome. Trust me. Anyways, I made another powered spawner, or that's what I'm kind of working on right now. And okay, a non-legitimate spawner nor capacitor bank, but whatever. Essentially, I am making, of course, I also gave myself the vial, what is known as a stab alloy golem spawner. Okay, this is something you can very technically do. You have to get into witchery, and it's possible like very early game, which is neat. Essentially, you take a witchery potion of biome change and you use it to spawn a stab alloy biome, which will spawn a golem. Stab alloy, or stabaloy, whatever you want to call it, is a crazy combination of 8 uranium to 1 titanium. Or is it 9 uranium, something like that? Do you guys see where this is going? The stab alloy golems drop, and I kid you not, a ton of ingots, plates, and even blocks of the stuff. You grind it down into dust and centrifuge it, and you have unlimited uranium and titanium. Now, I should note, if you're watching this after 2.9, they did heavily nerf the golems to just drop 1 ingot, and it's not even guaranteed. It's obvious that they were going to nerf this at some point. I'm just glad I got in before they actually did. But obviously very cheaty still. I wanted to do this because it sounds awesome, and it's going to save me a ton of time and resources later on. Also, this clip is not foreshadowing anything in the slightest, I promise. Yeah, it's totally foreshadowing what's about to happen. Again, since I didn't know how to properly set up Steve's factory manager, let's just say there might be some side effects with my poor programming. Yeah, you guys shouldn't be surprised in the slightest. The reactors blew up. So, what happened here, you ask? Well, first of all, this is why I got all of that warded glass and made sure to very much protect these things. Because if the warded glass wasn't there, it literally would have created like a several hundred block crater in my base. Actually, the base wouldn't be here any longer. So that's why I made all this warded glass, made sure that even the cables beneath it are protected, because any tiny crack of explosion that gets out of this thing will annihilate your base. I did it in a testing world, and there's like a vein of the world just gone. So yeah, reactors are a little bit dangerous. Essentially, what happened here is the command to replace the coolant didn't work properly, and well, it caused this. So yeah, I have to fix that now. It required a ton of fiddling with the controls, and I didn't like the original way whoever wrote the guide did it. So I did it my own way, where it automatically outputs the hot coolant into the vacuum freezer. I don't know what the normal way you're supposed to put the coolant in there is, but whatever. My way actually works, and it is cooling the very hot coolant back down to 0 where it can be reused. I'm so glad this system finally works because it is insanely powerful to have going. On top of that, I finally got all of the redstone to do its thing, and now it automatically shuts off when the battery banks are charged. The best part about this setup is that it currently gives me about 8+ amps of power to work with, which is awesome. Thorium only gives about 4 amps with a setup like this, but with a passive reactor, I think it's like 0.2 amps or something like that. It is sad how little you get normally. Also, turbo fun fact, the reason I've been playing without my texture pack on, I love the look of the gray. Unfortunately, the Steve's factory manager thing blends in with that gray, so I literally can't see what I'm doing in the interface. For certain things, I can't read like text very well in there. But now that I have a crazy source of uranium and titanium on top of a lot of power, it's time to have some real fun. One building that I've been working towards for literally all of this time at this point is called the Alloy Blast Smelter. Conveniently, it also requires a bunch of stabaloy to actually make the casings for it, so that's very cool. But let's just say this is going to be one of the most powerful buildings I've made in a long time. Besides the nuclear reactors, funny enough. This is what's going to start what I call the EV multi-block revolution. It allows me to make all sorts of brand new and advanced alloys to start making, well, brand new multi-blocks. Best example being the Centrifuge, the Macerator, the Electrolyzer, and several other cool ones. Unfortunately, they're all going to be changed in 2.9. It really sucks. Like, I built so many multi-blocks in this episode just for the design and cost, because obviously more blocks is more expensive, to go up like crazy in 2.9. So I feel like that's what I'm going to be doing for next episode, is just like rebuilding half my base at this point. Oh man, and they changed the sifter too. I forgot about that one, which means I'm gonna have to change the platinum setup. Ugh, it's gonna be a nightmare, that's all I know. There's not too much to explain about the Alloy Blast Smelter. It requires all sorts of random resources based on whatever you're making. A lot of like titanium stuff, like potassium, aluminum, niobium, chrome. It really depends. One interesting thing to note is that it always outputs the stuff as a liquid, so you have to use a fluid solidifier to create whatever you want. In this case, I'll generally be making ingots, and then I can work those into whatever I need, or I can use a rod or even plate mold to easily make tons of what I need for specific casings and blocks. The first of the new multi-blocks that I want to make is the Centrifuge. This thing is pretty awesome, I have to say. It gives me 2 parallels per voltage tier, which technically means 8 parallels, but I can go up to 10 by overclocking it, which is pretty awesome. This will allow me to, well, centrifuge resources like that endstone dust that I've been collecting forever at an insanely fast rate, and obviously process more of it at the same time, which is my primary goal. It's also nice for that stabaloy that I just started farming, and there's one resource I've wanted to harvest or process, I guess, for a while now. It's called like metallic mixture dust or whatever, and this stuff is from centrifuging stone dust, interestingly enough. This contains all sorts of assorted metals. Most important of all is immoltite and bauxite, which can both be turned into titanium eventually. So insanely cool stuff. Unfortunately, you require an EV tier centrifuge or higher to process. Now that I actually have one of those, I can finally start processing all of this stuff. I've got like thousands of this dust in storage, so it's very nice to have a system for it. The second awesome multi-block is an electrolyzer. Now, a running trend of these higher tier multi-blocks is that some of them require IV components. For example, the electrolyzer requires, well, an IV electrolyzer, which requires tungsten steel, or tung steel, however you call it, which requires tungsten. I made that in the last episode, nothing too difficult. However, it also requires HSSG, which is like a specialized alloy. It requires all sorts of stuff, including tung steel, I think maybe black steel and titanium, or it's some weird combination like that. I have all the resources for it though. But the electrolyzer isn't super special because I can already electrolyze most things. This just does it way faster and with a bunch of parallels. Same system as the centrifuge, I get 10 parallels because I've overclocked it to IV. After that, I spent a few hours working on my entire iron titanium setup. I deconstructed it and then placed it all together a bit closer and way more efficient. One of the biggest additions to the whole thing is a chemical bath. Okay, this is another thing that got heavily changed in 2.9, so this isn't going to be the same structure. The chemical bath is brand new. Actually, I looked at the structure, it looks sick by the way. It requires like 2 copper blocks and 2 zinc blocks, but it's obviously like a electroplating thing, if you've ever seen that in real life. They're really cool. Anyways, the chemical bath, which is technically the ore washing plant currently, it's the same structure, but you just screwdriver to change modes. This will allow me to process all of my immoltite ore and stuff like that into rudolite dust, which is way more efficient, so I get more titanium out of it, and it gives me all the byproducts a bit cheaper. It's a pretty awesome and efficient setup, and I can just keep half the infrastructure I've already had here, which is nice. I was also working on a bit more magic, and I managed to create two insanely important blocks. The Essentia Provider and Infusion Provider, I think. These are very neat buildings that allow me to connect my Applied Energistics network and all of the Essentia that I store in there to all of my magical machines, which is awesome. This allows me to save so much space and get rid of all of those jars. The primary issue with that jar setup is that it's very slow and inefficient. It works, but it just takes its sweet time. This is so much better. Now I can, export all of the Essentia I create right into my network, or import it, I guess, and then export that when I need to use it to create anything in the Crucible or infuse anything. Very nice, saves a lot of time and space. I also decided to do a lot more research to get this. So apparently, disabling warp like I did in the last episode is actually bad because you need like 50 warp levels to actually unlock certain research. So I had to do more dangerous research to get some specific stuff, and I'll have to find some other weird stuff. I honestly have no clue how it works, but this should allow me to get some of the best Thaumcraft stuff later on. Another awesome use of the centrifuge is actually centrifuging uranium dust. Alright, I know it sounds insane, but U-238 can be centrifuged into U-235 and plutonium dust, both of which have their uses for creating better, more powerful nuclear fuels. Unfortunately, to process the nuclear fuel I want, I have to compress all of this stuff even further. This is where the steam compressors actually come in handy. They're so much better. On top of that, I don't know if I've mentioned it yet, but steam compressors can actually do most of the recipes in the game. It's only like the extremely late game dense materials that you'll never use in the first place, at least I don't think so, that require high tier compressors like that. You can do 99% of the recipes in the steam ones, which is pretty awesome. But I'll just be here compressing this uranium for a while. I need to compress these tiny uranium 235 dusts and then the 238 large dust. And here's the part where it gets a bit more expensive. By combining these compressed U-235s and 238s with IC2 coolant, it just requires lapis dust and then water, or distilled water for a slightly better ratio. I get enriched uranium fuel. I guess I should also mention that you have to be wearing a hazmat suit to do all of this, or else you will get a ton of radiation. It's funny because in one of the quests I read for 2.9, it adds a plant. I kid you not, it's the troll face plant. It gives a bunch of random drops, but one of them can actually be plutonium dust. I love how the description reads, it gives you cancer. I was like, oh, I guess that makes sense. Yeah, radiation will do that to you. So that's what I'm working on for quite a while now, just making a ton of this fuel, because guess what? It's the exact same thing as the thorium, where I need 160 of this stuff to fuel one reactor. So uranium is obviously more expensive to get and process. As a matter of fact, I shouldn't even have it yet. I only do because cheating, the Stabila golems, that's the only reason I have this much. But it provides 5 times the power and probably a bit more than that in total power over time in the reactors. So it's absolutely worth to get it. I'm not supposed to have it now. I think I can get it after going to Mars. I believe tier 2 planets, or wait, is Mars tier 2? Whatever. The next planets I go to is where I can get uranium decently. My next project is very unique, to say the least. I need to create some quite bizarre materials. The first of which is long blaze rods. Yes, I have to combine 2 blaze rods and a forge hammer. I don't have many of these left, but thankfully I don't need a lot of, brewing stands. Why do I need brewing stands? Well, the other items in my inventory should kind of clue you into what I'm making. Besides, you see in the top left there, I have sealed wood planks. The next thing I want to make is a fascinating multi-block called the Big Barrel Brewery. Besides the awesome name of this thing, it's essentially just a multi-block brewery, which I don't have many uses for anymore, especially since I don't need ethanol. I've literally only ever used brewing stands so far to make a bit of ethanol in like the second or third episode, and even that I haven't really touched at all. But this has a fascinating use, which allows me to process some byproducts into something actually useful. And that is going to be either creosote oil, which I kind of forgot about, or heavy oil. I have like thousands of oil sand ore from the multi-block miner that I built earlier on, and I can convert both of those, combining them with, I think, talc and gallicose or some like soapy stone type thingy, and I can actually make lubricant for very cheap. I'm going to need tons of lubricant, and I mean like millions of tons throughout the run for like cutting stuff and crafting all sorts of things, most important of which is actually going to be the drilling fluid. Now, it doesn't take much lubricant, but I thought might as well automate it, cause I can. Earlier on, when I was doing some of the magic stuff, that warp allowed me to unlock some fascinating new research. It allows me to make something called void seeds. Void seeds can be used to make void metal. This is like the next tier of Thaumcraft metal. It's probably in the middle, because I know there's last tier stuff, but I am nowhere close to making that. It is unbelievably expensive. I think it costs like exquisite diamonds and nether stars to make ecorium, so I am nowhere near that. But void metal will allow me to upgrade my Tinker's construct tools a tiny bit further. It's not a massive upgrade, but it is cheap, and that's the important part. Vibrant alloy is still very expensive to make, and I'm going to need it for other things. I think maybe even circuit boards later on. I know that energetic alloy is required for foil to make circuit boards for one of the next few tiers. I just don't want to craft more vibrant alloy. That's what I'm trying to say. It is very annoying. One of the projects I was working on is something called the thermal boiler. It's a pretty awesome thing that allows me to make insane amounts of steam very quickly. The only problem is that I didn't want it for the steam. I wanted it to make a bunch of special resources. Unfortunately, I didn't realize those are locked behind these special filters for it. These things aren't even that bad to make, just a bunch of random resources. I just didn't realize they were physically required to get other stuff out of the thermal boiler. All I've been getting is obsidian, and I hate it. The thermal boiler can actually give you a bunch of cool stuff like tantalum, which is insane, but also electrum, bronze, silver, gold, and copper. So all sorts of awesome stuff from this machine. On top of that, by inputting lava, it actually gives you like Patoe lava as a byproduct, and you can throw that into a second thermal boiler to recycle it. So yeah, tons of steam from these machines. They're pretty awesome. Only downside to them is that they chew through lava like nothing else. So I will have to figure out a better way to get lava to my world, because transporting it manually is very slow and I can't do a ton at a time. But it's still very nice to get some of these not rare resources, but useful stuff out of lava, compared to centrifuging it especially. Besides that, I've kind of been procrastinating for a while. There's one massive project I want to work on, but as you can see here, it is ridiculously expensive. These things, what I'm trying to make, require tantalum plates, okay, not that bad, but tungsteel frames and long tungsteel rods. I don't have a lot of tungsten. That is my biggest problem. I absolutely need to source more. And the little tungsten I do is being turned into tungsteel and then quickly consumed to make all sorts of parts for what I want. But as you can probably read, I want to make the Laptronic supercapacitor. This is one of the coolest buildings in my opinion, because it's just like a giant battery. I mean, that's literally all it is. So a giant battery is exactly what it sounds like, or capacitor, if you will. It holds an insane amount of power. Unfortunately, it loses the tiniest bit of charge every second. It's just 1 EU, which is nothing, and that goes up to 3 EU when I max it out. so pretty cheap. Unfortunately, making it is not. It requires all sorts of insane stuff, a ton of laptronic, mostly to make the actual capacitors inside of it. On top of that, I have to spend a ton of circuits to actually make, I think it's like mainframes of this specific type, where I can get into the next energy tier of LUV. I have to get into an energy tier I can't even use yet to start making this thing. So insanely expensive, but absolutely worth it. It allows me to make a giant buffer of power in case something goes wrong with my reactor setup, or I draw a bit too much power at one specific time. However, to actually use the LSC, I require some specialized hatches. You see, the normal energy hatches just won't cut it with this thing. I have to make specialized multi-amp variants. These are also very expensive, require all sorts of power components, chips, even like tungsten cables and a bunch of tungsten parts for the last, well, upgrades of them. But my goal is to get up to 64 amp hatches, both for input and output. And that's what I'm going to be working on for a while. Only recently, I started to discover that a lot of multi-block buildings have certain restrictions on like how many blocks you can actually use on them. And if you look at their details, it'll tell you just like how many casings, for example, a multi-block needs. Which means you don't need like the full amount of casings, you can just barely get by with a few of them. And I'm going to be abusing the hell out of that, by the way. I'm going to use some of my old energy hatches as like the capacitor casings. I know it looks and sounds very stupid, and it is, but it saves me a ton of tungsteel. So I'm not exactly complaining. I actually learned this because I've been watching a lot of Neurotic Goose, like his old Gregtech videos, and this is one of the things I learned from him. It's actually not very old, it's from his Project Singularity playthrough. I'm just saying that because I've watched a lot of like his Garden of Grind, I think that's what it's called, you know, the skyblock Greg type thing. So yeah, I've learned a ton of stuff by watching him, and this is one of those little life hacks that I'm kind of using. It's pretty awesome. But you know my favorite part about the supercapacitor? You'll figure out very quickly if you did not set it up properly, because all of your machines fail, because, you know, that's my central power grid. Essentially, the redstone control I had on it requires like a solid block, not an energy hatch to work, so that kind of sucks. I didn't know that until now. What sucks even further is that I have to restart all of my machines on this line, and I lost some products like precious tungsteel. Either way, this is still an awesome building because, well, it stores so much power in it. It does really suck whenever you have to maintain it though. Not like maintenance. Maintenance isn't that bad, but you don't want maintenance problems to rack up or else you will drain power insanely fast. It's like 100 times power draw per problem, which means if I'm drawing 1 to 3 at max, just imagine that. It goes from 3 to 300 to, what is it, 10,000? Or is it, yeah, it's 10,000 to like, it gets insane very fast. But that's not the main problem. The main problem with it is actually if you want to ever upgrade or change it, then you got to disable all of the machines on your entire power grid. So that'll get interesting over time, to say the least. I've also had those reactors running for so long that I actually used up 2 batches of thorium fuel rods already, which is insane because those have, it's around like 14 hours of use time, which, yeah, that says a lot. And now I have to throw them in the centrifuge to get byproducts out of them. I get a bunch of radioactive materials that'll probably be useful later, and some krypton gas, which is fascinating. So yeah, very neat stuff. I also get my fuel cells back, but unfortunately not very much thorium, although that's kind of expected. I mean, the real killer here is how I don't get my steel rods back. All of that steel that I'm spending to make these fuel rods is gone, which also means the tungsteel I'm going to eventually use will also be gone. That's going to be painful. You might have seen it a little bit earlier, but I spent countless hours hollowing out the area around my base so that I can build more things. Using all of that cobblestone, I've been throwing it into an assembler to make compressed cobblestone, and then further throwing that into the implosion compressor, which, trust me, this is getting very expensive very fast. I think I did the math, and it's around 158,000 cobblestone, just imagine that for a minute, to make this thing. Essentially, I had to make 24 quadruple compressed cobblestone, right? And then combine that with diamond blocks. And then that gives me bedrockium ingots, which I'm not supposed to get for a very long time. However, I can make them, well, with all that expensive stuff a little bit early by throwing those into a bending machine, which is crazy. I can just do that at low tiers like this. I can get bedrockium plates. Those plates can be used to make a bedrockium drum. This thing holds 65 million liters of fluid, which is not useful all the time, except for something like, say, drilling fluid, where you are going to need millions upon millions of liters of it for every single operation. And that's what I'll be using this one for. As a matter of fact, I'm almost tempted to make another one because I just love the capacity of this thing. I don't need it, but I want it. Anyways, that's going to be fueling my drill for quite a while now, especially considering the drill doesn't take much power at all. This drill literally consumes 3/8 of an amp, so overclocking it is super easy, and it's very cheap to run, even with a relatively older fuel at this point like benzene. Also, something got messed up in the reactor setup again. Thankfully, it wasn't a catastrophic meltdown like it was last time. The fuel rods just weren't inserted properly, so I'm gonna have to manually clear it out and reinsert all of them, which kind of sucks, but it could have been far worse than it was. With that fixed, I decided to get back to working on some more multi-blocks. Now, these are going to be a lot more unique than just the cubes I've made. Well, at least this first one. Actually, this might be one of my favorite looking multi-blocks so far. Of course, once we get into 2.9, they have some insanely cool looking ones in there. But this is the Industrial Precision Lathe. It's a very neat structure, and the only tier component, which is like what calculates how many parallels a machine has, is actually the item pipe casing in there. So I can use any old glass as the exterior. Same thing for the Laptronics supercapacitor. I could have just used fused quartz, and I wish I'd realized that at the time. Borosilicate glass is way more expensive to make, so if you can skip using it, well, yeah, just use cheap fused quartz. This thing is going to be awesome at processing tons of items at once, great for making screws and quartz rods because I need those for quartz cables for applied energistics. From one of the quests I completed, I got this thing called a Thallium of Remedium? Oh, I get it, remedy, I see. Essentially, you can get this from a mission or doing magic, but I got it as a loot bag drop. It's pretty awesome. In exchange for durability, it will cleanse you of debuffs, which can be very helpful, especially for specific things like radiation. I think it can fully cleanse, because you can't get rid of radiation with Terra warts. The next multi-block that I'm working on, I think this is another one that they reworked in 2.9 because it's just a cube right now, and anything that looks just like a cube will be reworked. I don't know about the Electrolyzer, maybe that one is. Oh, I think it is for sure. And then something else, whatever. This setup is using applied energistics and a bunch of input buses. They all have specific circuits on them so that they make specific products. This is a giant bending press machine, so I have it set to like 1, 2, 10, and 9. These are all the most common like bending machine recipes. You know, you've got basic plates, double plates, 10 for foil, and 9 for dense plates if I want to make more reactors. If you look carefully enough, there has been an insane time skip between these two clips. Actually, I did the math, it's about 30 hours between these clips. And yeah, this is what I've been working on in between those 30 hours. It's exactly what it looks like. The platinum line is finished. As you can see, I have chained all of these large chemical reactors together for as much efficiency as physically possible. Same thing with the EBFs. Unfortunately, there's still some things I need for this entire setup that I can't get yet. Like, there are 2 EBFs that require IV or LUV power. Yeah, it's LUV. And I require IV hatches for those, which I don't have yet. Besides that, this entire line taught me a ton about using applied energistics and stuff like that. I was originally hoping to just use pipes for the whole thing, but once I realized how complicated every single recipe is, I mean, yeah, you can see my network here. I wouldn't be able to do this with physical pipes. Applied energistics is physically required. I have several P2P buses, which is like a direct connection across great lengths, which is very nice for some things. And yeah, I won't bother explaining any of this because I'll be perfectly honest, I don't actually remember how half this stuff works again. Like, if you thought the first baby Platline was complicated, this is a billion times worse because there's so many more products I have to deal with. Also, fun fact, half of it doesn't even work right now because I accidentally cut off one specific resource that I needed, and yeah, I'll fix it later. This thing is just a nightmare. I forgot to mention, that setup also took all of my oil refining capacity offline, because that's where I got all of the LCRs and hatches from. So I have to make even more of those to expand my stuff further. I built this little setup. It creates some acetone and uses other resources to make advanced glue, whatever the heck that stuff is. And this advanced glue is going to be insanely important for my next major project. It's kind of funny because I'm actually going to deconstruct this setup very soon because one of my next projects is going to give me the vinyl acetate that I needed for this whole thing, like, way easier, on top of acetic acid and acetone. Kind of embarrassing that I built this for one tiny project and I immediately got a better source of everything later. Oh well, I needed this for now, and it's done. The new advanced glue has several uses for all sorts of things, but here is the insane one. Yes, do you see my inventory? For the next part of the game, getting into IV, I need to make something called graphene. Yeah, the cost is exactly what it looks like. Advanced glue, but that's not the worst part. Graphite is very easy, I have tons of that. It's the phosphorus wafers that it takes. It takes half a stack of wafers per one of these, which is pure insanity, by the way. I think I get like 32 wafers per boule, so let's just say this is going to be a little bit expensive on my solar grade silicone. I've also finally gotten my first maintenance issue with my supercapacitor, and it requires 3 more power per second now. I forget, I guess I must have done the math earlier wrong, because I'm pretty sure it should be like multiplicative where it consumes tons of power with a bunch of maintenance issues, but sure, whatever. I've also been working on making even more multi-blocks, believe it or not, and I've set up a couple of ore washing plants. Yes, these are proper ones, so I have 32 parallels, which is insane for that. I can process tons of ores. Then it gets sorted and put into either the large macerator, which is very nice to have, and then into the centrifuge. So I have a lot more ore processing capacity now, which is pretty awesome. And before my next project, I took a quick detour to the Nether. I had a really neat idea that I wanted to do, and this is using the same ore drilling plant from earlier. If you remember what I said, these machines only use 3/8 of an amp, which means you can easily power 2 of them with the same generator, which is pretty awesome. I'll be using an EV hatch instead of just HV, and the setup's a bit tricky because you can't have like everything shared between them. So I'll have the power, drill fluid input, and the output hatch shared between them. Each one of them will have their own maintenance hatch and another input hatch for the mining pipe. Oh, and did I mention, I haven't actually made these ender chests. These are, the cross-dimension ones that are awesome to work with. You can also color code them for a ton of different channels. I have these and some tanks and a couple of other things that I actually got from loot bags, which is awesome. Those are a relatively not common but possible drop from EV bags, which is awesome. I'm almost able to make these. I actually don't know what's stopping me. It might be endurium, but I think I can probably make that with something soon. But it's still very nice to get these things without having to craft them, because that's all magic stuff. The real reason I love these things is because you can see here, the resources just get transported straight into my base. It is awesome. The reason I'm mining stuff from the nether, well, I'm actually gonna throw out like all the netherrack and sulfur garbage I don't want. I actually am looking for sphalerite. Emeralds, quartz is also nice, but yeah, sphalerite for one of my projects later on. So far, pretty much all of the chemical reactor recipes are way better to just put into large chemical reactors instead, because it's generally easier. This is one of the few recipes where I actually don't think that's the case. This is the silicone to solar grade silicone recipe. It requires hydrochloric acid, but the nice thing is it's an entirely closed loop. So if you route everything right, you can just put in silicone and get out solar grade, which is awesome. However, the large chemical reactor recipe is absolute garbage, by the way, because it has like a bunch of different byproducts that you then have to electrolyze. It's a giant mess. This recipe is just easier. I also accidentally made 2 EV chemical baths instead, but that's not actually a problem because I can use that to make the ore washing plant. And I'm gonna need several more of those eventually. Well, now that I think about it, with 2.9, they're gonna change the buildings, so maybe not, but oh well. With some basic pipe work, including liquids and solids, it wasn't difficult at all. It's just a bunch of routing everything. I have a very simple solar grade silicone setup. Okay, that was a lot of S words, but you get the point. The craziest part about this is it's kind of chewing through my silicone reserves. I may need to automate more soon. That's not exactly a problem because most of the silicone I need has to be solar grade. This is mostly for making stuff like circuits, or boules to make the circuits and wafers eventually. You get the point. Not 1, not 2, but 3 new multi-block buildings that I'll have to rebuild when 2.9 gets released. I cannot wait for that. As you can tell by my tone, yeah, it's gonna freaking suck to rebuild all of these and make all their new parts, especially considering some of the new buildings require solenoids, which it's a very expensive type of block that was only required for the large fluid extractor. I haven't made any of them yet because I didn't need the large fluid extractor just yet, but I'll probably make like EV ones since those are relatively possible for me to make. But yeah, I'm gonna need a lot of them in the future now because, well, all sorts of new multi-blocks require them. The first multi-block I made is a wire mill. It's obviously going to be extremely important for making all kinds of wires, but I'll have to remake it. The second one is the mixer, which is also very useful. And the third one is actually the extruder. Obviously, you can tell just by their design and textures that they are going to be remade. The extruder just has a bunch of inputs with all the different molds inside of them. And actually, I think the new extruder has like ghost mold slots, which is pretty cool, but I don't care about it that much. I'll just use my method here. But yeah, I have even more resources automated now, which is pretty awesome. The main reason I haven't done all this automation up until this point is because I really wanted to make all the multi-blocks for more efficiency. Now that I'm getting into EV, okay, well, I've been in there for a while, but especially getting into IV and maybe LUV, I think it's finally time I started retiring some of my old machines, especially now that I have multi-block versions of them. So I'm going to be removing all the covers because I can always reuse those, and I'll be throwing these machines into an arc furnace. I've checked all the recipes, and most of the time arc furnace recycling is the most efficient, especially because it always gives you full ingots back instead of just like dust, which now that I think about it usually isn't too bad because I can always reuse like steel dust and titanium dust for certain recipes, but in general it just gives you more back, including annealed copper instead, bronze, tin, all the good stuff. The only stuff you don't really get is like rubber products, but that's not a major issue. I have plenty of rubber stuff automated already. I returned to the nether so that I can pick up my drill, and the craziest thing, it has consumed over 18 million liters of drilling fluid. That's just crazy. I love this bedrock drum so much. The capacity is amazing, but man, I can confirm the price of this thing still stings. I won't be able to get that much cobblestone again for a while. I will be making the cobblestone generator building. That is actually another thing they redid in 2.9, so it's a little bit more expensive to build, but probably still heavily worth it for infinite cobblestone. Especially now that I think about it, I'll need infinite cobblestone to make singularities for my applied energistic stuff too. Another side project that I was working on is actually upgrading my nanosuit a tiny bit more. I can actually make a nanosuit jetpack thing instead of just my chest plate. I will say now though, I've had most of the parts for it. It's a tiny bit expensive, it requires a lot of platinum and expensive circuits. The problem with it is it's absolute garbage. It is so bad, the flying speed is non-existent. It's the worst jetpack I've ever seen, honestly. My current copter pack is 1 trillion times better because it's close to creative flying, well, in every way really. It just requires fuel. And that's something I'll hopefully solve by the beginning of next episode. If you've played Gregtech up to this point before, or if you're an especially keen viewer, you might have noticed something kind of terrifying, honestly. Up to this point, and I can't believe I'm saying this, I've been crafting pretty much everything manually. Everything you always see in my inventory and all of my chests, yeah, I've been making all of this myself. Of course, machines are also doing the work, but I should have automated everything the millisecond I got applied energistics. Especially now, I'm really regretting that decision because, man, I need so much stuff just automated. I am finally getting sick of crafting it myself. And every time I need a tiny component, like these processors that I need to make interfaces, for example, I'm just kicking myself because I'm like, man, why didn't I just automate this earlier? So yeah, that is my main goal currently, trying to automate as much and as many resources as possible. Thankfully, I've already had a tiny bit of stuff set up, and I've watched enough tutorials and guides now to know what I'm doing. I'm gonna have all sorts of different assemblers because I can't get high tier assemblers for now. They'll just be EV ones with certain circuits in them. For example, 3 with a dual interface so that I can craft with fluids as well. And this is actually going to let me automate circuits or surface mount diodes. They have a very unfortunate abbreviation, to say the least. But these diodes will allow me to craft circuits way easier. Unfortunately, I haven't automated my clean room yet. I am still using that same 5x5 clean room that I had from the start. No joke, I've been making all of my circuits up to this point through that, but oh well. And after a couple of hiccups having to make even more patterns, as you can see, I've had the entire thing fully set up. I have most recipes for common parts that I need. The motors, pumps, robot arms, you name it pretty much. And of course all the pipes, plates, rubber gaskets, or not gaskets, rubber rings, rotors, and rods, stuff like that. Everything I need to start automatically crafting any part that I could want. This is so much better than having to find all the resources and craft it myself. I am already loving this setup, and it only took a little bit of preparation, which is very nice. Again, still need to automate my clean room. No clue when I'm going to be doing that. Probably sometime in the next episode. I definitely want to upgrade the size significantly, but that might not be necessary with some of the other multi-blocks I want to build. Unfortunately, the ones I want to build are also updated, so it's good that I didn't make them here, but man, they are so much more expensive to build. In the background, I've been working on all sorts of stuff, including this massive array of distillation towers. I have made 2 industrial coke ovens, which is another building getting reworked, unfortunately. The rework does look really cool and allow you to add way more parallels with more coils, both normal coils and the special coke oven ones, which is very cool, but still annoying because it's going to be a massive building now. Anyways, this whole setup is processing wood tar, to get all the benzene products, because I'm reworking this area, oil to get all the oil products, and wood something else? I can't actually remember what the other wood product is. It might be vinegar or something like that. But essentially, that's where I'm getting all of my ethanol, acetic acid, acetone, and other good stuff like that from. It's pretty awesome. But like I said, I'm gonna have to rework part of this again, so I didn't bother completing the whole area. I also learned this actually from a comment very recently, and I'm using this LCR setup to process 4 different recipes at once. Because apparently you can just process all of the oil and desulfurize it with one LCR, which is quite insane, I have to say. The recipes produce so much and they're so fast, it's absolutely worth it to do like this. On top of that, I can just power it with like benzene, which is nice. On top of that, I guess I should also mention that to get the high tier coils that you need for the industrial coke oven, there's actually 2 tiers, but the reason I've been waiting for so long until now is because the higher tier requires a material called HSS-S instead of G. It requires that HSSG stuff that I made earlier. I turned that into coils for my electric blast furnace, and literally spent hours making the higher tier coils so that I could put that on all of my blast furnaces, since you can technically skip that 1 tier coil, which is quite nice. And yeah, I need that higher tier material to make the special, well, casing for the ICO. It's very nice. And that actually gives me 30 parallels instead of 18, which is absolutely overkill, but I love it. And I'm probably gonna get way more parallels once I set up the new coke oven in the next episode. On top of that, I set up my other electrolyzer. Yeah, I kind of stole this one from the rudolite/immoltite setup because I don't have any more immoltite to process. And I'm going to be using this to convert a bunch of the resources I get from, well, wood processing technically. So like benzene, the dimethylbenzene that I don't want, and other overflow products I'll be turning into hydrogen because I am kind of out of hydrogen right now. It's a major issue. And some of them can produce oxygen, which is nice, but again, I don't need oxygen. I kind of have an overflow of that, especially thanks to my original electrolyzer. So that's what this setup is going to be doing for now. If you want spoilers on what all of this was intended for, well, I wanted to make this entire setup and all of these seemingly different products so that I can actually make high octane gasoline. That is my primary goal. It is the most powerful, like, base fuel in the game, not rocket fuels. And I want it partially for my jetpack currently, but also for whatever machines or drills I may need later on. Major hint on the drills, because I will like to go to Mars and other planets eventually. Obviously, I don't want to set up a reactor for every single, like, drilling operation. So yeah, I'm gonna need some other new fuel source. And this, kids, is why you should always check your Laptronic supercapacitor. You see what happens when it shuts down and runs out of power? My entire base goes offline. And that right there is my issue with having central power. All of the generators, like, they're easy enough to fuel and power their own machines. So if one has an issue, it doesn't cause the entire grid to collapse, like that. So what was the problem? Well, something weird happened with one of the sensors, and I may have ran out of fuel in my bus, but there's plenty of fuel for the machines. It's a long story. I just had to change the setting and it worked. You know, crazy fun story. Right after all of this recording, I opened up Gregtech so I could take some screenshots for this video, and the alarm that I placed for this thing started blaring, which completely jump scared me out of nowhere. And for real this time, I ran out of fuel just a bit later. So I will switch over to uranium eventually. I now have to set up the proper code to tell the things to replace everything with uranium rods instead of thorium. It's gonna be a mess, but that's for me to worry about in like a couple of weeks. I've heavily slowed down progress in what I'm working on because this is around the point I realized that 2.9 is going to change so much I'm going to have to redo. But the final project is something I should have worked on a while ago, I will admit, and part of the reason I actually needed to mine in the nether for some sphalerite. You see, there's one resource that's not easy to get by any means. It's called indium. The only way I can produce this stuff is by combining sphalerite and zinc with sulfuric acid. Indium is used for, I think, like the next major set of electronics. It's got something to do with, you know, high grade materials, electronic stuff like that. I don't know. I need it. I'll make it. No big deal. The craziest part is that I have these, I think at EV tier, and I have so much overclock, I guess, because each one of these recipes produces like 72 kiloliters of the stuff. So I actually had to have multiple input and output buses or hatches for each of these so I could process enough of the liquid. Oh yeah, it produces kind of a byproduct. It's like lead zinc solution, and I can just throw that into an electrolyzer to get lead, zinc, and I think water, which I'll just vent, obviously. So yeah, very simple, easy setup, but I did run out of sphalerite, so I'll have to mine more of that next episode again. To help move some of that liquid between my electrolyzers, I mean, sure, I could have used super tanks, but those would slow me down. So I actually decided to make some of these palladium cells. These things aren't even that expensive because guess what? They're not made of palladium. You only need that for a couple of rings, which is stupidly cheap. They're made out of double chrome, which I have tons of at this point. And for 2 million liters, that is a bargain, especially in Gregtech. The funny thing is that from one of the quests I completed after this, I got some tungsteel cells as well, which is far more expensive, especially for me. Now that I think about it, those capacities aren't really even good. I can actually recycle the tungsteel cells to get some free tungsteel. That's kind of a great idea. I remember hearing about recycling, these high tier cells in a speedrun once, and that's kind of a good idea, honestly. But that's about all I've gotten for now. I have almost 8 stacks of indium, which will probably be decent for a little while, but I'll certainly need way more later on. And it's actually going to be very useful because I need this to start making, I think it's like IV superconductors, which are required to make certain parts, including, I think, the IV energy hatch. That's all for next episode, though. It's going to be an absolute nightmare. I have to rebuild half of my base. I have to get started with crops NH and get all sorts of new crops. The industrial farm is going to be insanely expensive to build, but some of the new crops I've been looking at are extremely powerful. I really want them. There's even a crop that allows you to grow nether stars. Like, how insane is that? Freaking nether stars. I don't have to deal with magic anymore. But of course, that's all in several weeks, maybe even a month or so. But anyways, thank you all for watching. As usual, I really appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Of course, a special shout out to all of my members. You guys are awesome and help me out a ton. But anyways, this is going to be Enzo from LookIntoGaming, signing out.